Hi everyone, Gunthany Show Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's the halfway point of the year, which means I have to tell you guys, I have to get into what are essentially my favorite albums of 2017 so far. My reviews for these records are linked down there in the description box, and these are also listed in no particular order, okay? Also, don't want to forget to mention that Austin and Jeremy, contributors to the Needle Drop, came up with their own mid-year album lists on the website, which are linked in the description. Check those out too, because they have different tastes and different recommendations from yours truly. But for me, the album highlights of 2017 thus far are as follows. For one, the new Fleet Foxes album, which I'm probably mentioning first because I reviewed it pretty recently, so it's really sticking out in my mind. The record Crack Up, easily the band's most abstract and instrumentally dense record yet, but still brings those bright vocal harmonies, that inspiring songwriting, and thoughtful lyrics that I typically expect from Fleet Foxes. There are quality songs on this thing, great production, even if it does take a little bit to appreciate because the song structures can be kind of linear, can be kind of weird. I'm so happy that after all these years, Fleet Foxes is still sounding hungry, still experimenting, still taking risks, and being ambitious. Next, the new Sun Kill Moon record, Common as Light and Love Are Red Valleys of Blood. One of Mark Kozelek's longest and most monstrous albums. You could say it's Kozelek at his most Kozelek. Of course, embarking on these really long-winded and lyrically dense narratives about everyday life. It's just one musical monologue after another, and it seems that, in my opinion, Mark is getting better at doing this as he's going along. But if there's another thing that grabbed me about this record, it's that he ventures into some really groovy folk rock, like a touch of post-punk, and there are moments on this thing where it sounds like he's even kind of rapping, but miraculously it does not rub me the wrong way. I mean, I love that Mark is, again, staying ambitious, he's trying new things, he's taking risks, he's, kind of pushing his style and pushing his trademark sound forward into new territory on this thing, and that's what makes this record so exciting for me. Next, shout out to my dude Neil Cicierega for his Mouth Moods mixtape, his kind of extension of the Mouth Sounds and Mouth Silence mashup album series. This thing is so fun, it's kind of jokey, it's silly of course, but I think it's Neil's tightest record yet in this style as far as like an album experience. Some of his most inventive and hilarious mashups yet land on this project. I don't know what else to say about this other than that I just keep coming back to it because I find it so funny. It's so entertaining. I love music that has a strong sense of humor. I love music that has a strong sense of personality. But there's also something very smart and creative and inventive about the way that Neil pulls songs from seemingly different worlds together into one cohesive musical unit. Next, I got to give a shout out to the new Mountain Goats album, Goths. Easily one of the Mountain Goats' most musically adventurous, most track list solid, not like a huge dud in the track list in my opinion. And then there's just the theme, the topic of the album, Goths, literally goth culture in the Western world, as it were. Through these themes, John Darnielle, frontman of the Mountain Goats, explores, irrelevancy, aging, extremity, darkness, and a myriad of other things. Not only that, but this is the Mountain Goats' first entirely guitarless album, and the band takes this opportunity to venture into a lot of musical styles and instrumental palettes that, maybe they have kind of flirted with in the past, but really just kind of cannonball into on this record over here, and quite successfully too. Of course, the songs are there, and John Darnielle's fantastic and dramatic vocal performances are also present as well. Really awesome to see the band continuing with a lot of ideas in their head and fire in their belly at this leg in their career. Next, the new Kirin J. Callinan album, Bravado, such fantastic and out there, off the beaten path and whacked out pop record. Kieran really kind of, in a lot of respects, abandoned the darkness of his breakout record Embracism to take on something that is much more vivid and kooky and strange, but also groovy and funky. There's something irresistibly visceral and sensual and sexy and fun about this record, but it's so insane at points too. I've never heard a record that simultaneously is so accessible, but it's also so crazy. If you love your pop music to have kind of an eccentric personality to it, an out there point of view, sonically and visually, you're gonna want to give this a listen. You don't want to miss out on this. Probably my favorite hip hop mixtape album of the year so far has to be this new Brockhampton, Saturation. These guys are such a great group. They just are just greater than the sum of their parts. They gel as a unit. They just bring so much momentum and so much energy and so much personality to each track. Hooks are there. Production is inventive and cutting edge. Each member has their own distinct personality. There are a lot of witty bars here, a good sense of humor as well, but also a surprising amount of tracks that take a more serious and somber emotional tone that, given, the aggressive songs that were kind of hyping this album up, I wouldn't have expected to go over as well as they did. Super solid, front to back, lots of highlights. If you miss this thing, you're seriously doing yourself a disservice. Next, the new Father John Misty album, pure comedy, one of my favorite singer-songwriter records this year, if not my favorite thus far. Loving the production on this thing, loving that Josh Tillman is essentially taking his sense of humor and kind of pointing it at what he sees as kind of the flaws of the world at large, the problems sitting at the root of human nature. And he critiques these things, he rips these things apart hilariously for one track after the next. Now, I get it, some of the instrumentals are very somber, they're very low-key, but, it's really his sense of humor, it's really his biting wit, that I think makes all of it work. I just love the instrumentation on this thing. I love Tillman's sense of humor. I just love the song topics. I think it's a nice, round, not so much conceptual, but a strong thematic album. Next is one of the most fun, funky records I've heard this year. The new Ibibio Sound Machine, Uyai. Ibibio Sound Machine, group from the UK, and on this thing, they are in a very novel way, fusing elements of electronic dance music with Afrobeat, funk, as well as pop music. God, this album is so fun. It's just non-stop grooves, sharp vocal melodies, vivid, quality, sound-rich production. The grooves, the grooves, the grooves. I just can't say enough nice things about this record. It has me really excited for what the band has coming out in the future because, God, this is so solid. This is the record that I hoped that the band would release the moment that I heard about them on some of their earliest singles. Next, one of my favorite albums of the year, but definitely not as celebratory or as upbeat as the record that I just talked about. Of course, the new Mount Eerie album, A Crow Looked at Me. Very special and a very strange album from Phil Elverum, who basically meditates for the duration of the entire album on the recent passing of his wife. So yes, this is a very heavy album. Musically, it's very sparse, it's very skeletal, it's very minimal, much in the same way that his Dawn album was, which in my opinion is kind of an underappreciated album in the Mount Eerie canon. So it's pretty interesting to hear Phil kind of go back to that stripped back and very kind of opaque sound. And on top of these instrumentals, deliver a series of tracks that run a lot like diary entries, documenting the pain and anguish that Phil now finds himself moving through as a single father. It's a very tough listen, but it's also a very powerful record too that, if you really want to go through as much as you possibly can via the experience of music, exactly what the protagonist, exactly what the creator of the album is going through emotionally. This is most likely the closest you're going to come to it this year, this decade, maybe ever. Next, I have to give a shout out to the new Feist album, Pleasure. Feist really came through on this new album over here with a tight collection of tracks that not only showcase her rowdy side, but I think these songs also reach a new level of intimacy for Feist too. A lot of these tracks are just dripping with emotion, dripping with swagger. She sounds so uninhibited and so free on this record, and that's just kind of inspiring to me, part of what makes the album so magical, and hopefully that's what you guys enjoy about it too. As well as like the good performances, the songwriting, the fact that everything sounds like it's just all happening there at once. It's very much like lightning in a bottle, the in-the-moment feel of the album, that is. But I have to give a shout out also to the new Xiu Xiu album, Forget. Xiu Xiu going back to their post-punk roots a little bit on this one. This is one of their most direct and kind of distorted and rough around the edges albums in a while. But still, they managed to drop some of their biggest and most catchy singles of their career so far, like Wondering. Just happy that Xiu Xiu is still coming through with a lot of energy, a lot of raw energy at this point in their career. Just loving how sort of gutsy this album is, in my opinion. Loving how dark some of the lyrical themes on this thing are. Loving the very textured and very rough production. But if you're looking for something angry, you have to try out the new Idols album, Brutalism, album. Like, God, is this some good, noisy, abrasive punk and post-punk. Not only that, but the lyrics on this thing are really funny. They're so nasty and cynical and just snide. There's a real kind of bitterness to the lyrics on this thing that I just can't deny, especially on tracks like Stendhal Syndrome or Mother. Also, this album has an incredible amount of grooves to it. Like, the riffs are really nasty. And miraculously, the band manages to work in like some decent vocal melodies and like guitar lines too that have just like a really strong melodic character to them. It's just like instantly catchy. The title of this thing is Brutalism, and it lives up to that title. Next, I gotta give a shout out to one of the most innovative and fun and kind of quirky rock records that I've heard this year. It has to be the new King Gizzard album, Flying Microtonal Banana. The psych garage rock outfit's foray into microtonal tuning is very fun. It's very jammy, lots of personality, lots of colorful tracks. This experiment could have gone awry, could have been limiting, but instead the band really pulls through with a solid set of tracks on this one. Wiley, Godfather, grime highlight of the year in my opinion. Wiley really goes back to basics on this record and gives us a hard-nosed, purists grime record with so many tracks on it, so many bangers. And not only is this album just purely grime from a musical standpoint, from a sonic standpoint, but on numerous tracks here, Wiley sort of dives into the culture lyrically, giving listeners who may be less familiar with the genre like a bit of a who's who, a bit of a history as far as like the sound, the people who are kind of the biggest names or the most relevant people in the genre, where Wiley came from and started in this style of music. Maybe it's more of a grime fans grime record, maybe not the best grime album to hear to sort of introduce yourself to the genre. But if you are curious about this style of music, I would not tell you to stray away from this, not for a second. Give this thing a shot. Next, shouting out the new Elder album, Reflections of a Floating World. Easily the best doom metal album that I've heard this year, sludge metal album that I've heard this year. The band bringing the sounds of doom together with progressive rock for a pretty flashy, throttling, visceral album that's very dynamic, multiple phases to the songs on this thing, very epic, very grand, great performances, great production, and songs that despite how long and despite just how winding they are, they stay pretty engaging from beginning to end. The vocal performances, I think, are a little better, and this is easily the band's most inventive and creative record so far. And finally, I want to point out the new Perfume Genius album, No Shape. If you have not heard this already, I mean, great singer-songwriter record. Mike Hadrius takes so many musical risks on this thing, going in a seemingly different direction, stylistic direction, with each song. There are way more hits than misses on this thing, too, I would say. And, that's it. It's just kind of like the same potent, emotional songwriting that you enjoy from his previous records, just kind of, dolled up with different instrumental palettes, most of which are pretty adventurous. And I think we're going to leave it at that. Obviously there are other albums on my love list that I like quite a bit too, some of which I think are pretty underrated. The new Quali Chris album, new Sampha album, St. John Hawk. They're all there, and I still love them. But you need to head down there in the description to check those out on the website. Again, the records that I mentioned here, these are sort of my tip top. These are the records that really to me stood out far and ahead this year, have been this year's biggest musical highlights, and we are going to leave it at that. Tell me down in the description what have been some of the most significant albums in your opinion this year, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Transition. Have you given these albums a listen? If you haven't, what are you waiting for? All my reviews are linked down there in the description, along with Austin and Jeremy's mid-year lists too. Next to my head over here, we will link you to our great albums playlists, where I do, sort of album recommendations of every month, rounding up what stood out to me musically. And also subscribe to the channel too, okay? I will catch you guys in the next video. Stay hydrated forever.